Hey, meeting in order for the budget committee fiscal year 2025. Today is May the 15th. It is 5:31.
Okay,
Jeff?
well, I think the first item on there was there a public comment period.
There is public comment period.
So I guess we should find out if there are any.
We do not have any forms in the box.
Okay,
We have one from yesterday. Did you file, didn't you send all three? So you signed up? Yeah, it was submitted yesterday.
Okay, the one's gonna.
Yeah, so he has one from yesterday. And so, Mr. Chair, if you'll read the statement and then we can start the timer and when he begins talking.
So now is the time for public comments. Thank you for participating in public comment this evening. The public comment period is an essential part of local government meetings. Each person has 3 minutes to speak. Our governing body takes the input into consideration. However, in observance of Oregon open meeting laws, this is not a time for dialogue, but rather a time for us to listen to you. Our city administrator and city reporter are taking notes of action if needed. Do we have anyone signed up?
We have one signed up.
Yep, I'm sorry, I think I have that wrong. It's Chris Castleman from the Greater Coos County area.
Chris, before you start, I just would like to make a note. As we were closing yesterday, there was a little bit of confusion over public comment yesterday. And I heard you mention just before I closed the meeting that it was on the website. So I went and looked on the website and you were indeed correct. I think that the intent was public comment would be today. It wasn't real clear on the website, so I apologize for that.
Appreciate it. So as Jessica mentioned, I'm not from North Bend, so you might be wondering why I'm here. I kind of addressed that last night at the council meeting, but I'm running for county office. North Bend is in Coos County, and a bunch of people reached out to me to get more involved and learn about the budget for North Bend and look into it and see if there's anything that I found interesting. So I did look at it yesterday and I took some notes. Some people pointed out already that the raising salaries to a market level, the question kind of arose, is that the right time? Is now the right time to do that? The points I wrote down was $261,000 in the general fund and $481,000 across all funds is the number that you're looking at just simply by raising salaries to a market level. My question is, who asked for that? Like, did the council ask for that? Did the city administrator? Did the mayor? Who kind of, what was the genesis of that idea to start raising everybody to a market level? I mean, if I was an employee, I would love to get the highest salary I can, but we're in a situation where, you know, you guys are going to be running into a deficit pretty quick. Even with reserves, you're going to start eating up those reserves, and in a couple of years, you're going to be in a deficit. So, they mentioned yesterday about the fire department had 15 years of the same employees, kind of at the top of the pay scale. And they stayed around. They worked for the city of North Bend. They didn't leave. They didn't go somewhere else. Because I kind of heard that was the mention of like, why do we raise people to a market rate? Well, they might leave. They might go to another city. They might quit. Is that happening? You know, are there people threatening to leave? Have you seen it happen already? And it's kind of a crisis. So just my advice would be to kind of keep that in mind when you're making this decision, because that's about $500,000. It's not going to cover the full deficit, but it's something. I mentioned this last night. I don't know how much time do I have?
You have a minute.
Okay. I don't think I'll get it covered, but I mentioned it last night. If you start eroding the public trust by handing out this extra money to raise people to a market level, it's going to be harder when you guys go down the road later and ask them for a public safety fee increase or a sewer charge increase. They're going to be like, wait a minute, though, you're handing out all these raises to people. You're not paying for the things that are needed. And I know that public safety is a much larger budget than $500,000 raised in salaries. So just keep that in mind. That's really all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, are we ready? So thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for your participation last night. Also, thank you for your questions. We've taken those questions and put them into slides. So our plan is to go through those with you and have that discussion. And I believe after that, there is some action that is required by this body in terms of approving the proposed budget, which would take it to the next step. So that's kind of what's on tap here tonight. So we're just going to launch right into it, and these are in no particular order. I just took the questions, put them into slides, and as they were posed, and we'll talk about each one of them as we go. So the first one is, the grant race is new to staff responsibilities. Would any staffers speak to collaborating for grants, getting them, and managing them? And we have staff that will speak to the committee about their experience with grants. I'd like to have Haley, first of all, come up and talk to you about her experience with grants. And after that, we'll have Cal Mitz also say some words.
Good afternoon. So Chief Mitz and I have decided to divide up the answer to this question. I'm going to talk about the application process, and he's going to talk about management and reporting and what happens after you get the grant. I'm going to use my experience with the library department as I go through my answer. I think it's important that you know that prior to even considering applying for a grant, there is work to be done. Shortly after I started working for the city of North Bend, the library adopted its first ever strategic plan, and that was in 2018. We had to update that plan in 2020. So before you can identify relevant goals or grants that meet those goals, your department or the city has to establish those goals and objectives. And those plans have to be updated on a regular basis. It's often a first or key question on a grant application. Funders want to know how you've involved the community in the decision-making and priority setting processes. And I can tie all of the grants that we have received at the library in the last 4 years to that strategic plan. Once your strategic goals are in place, you can begin to identify grant opportunities. This involves researching and building your network. It's very important to align potential grants with your strategic goals, and in the case of the city, council priorities. Instead of developing a project to match a grant, we need to find grants that match our goals and our projects. We assess eligibility and feasibility for applying based on the department's needs and grant requirements. Are we looking at an application that's going to take 80 hours of staff time to complete and 120 hours to report on for $500 worth of funding? Can we fulfill the requirements of the funder, such as matching funds or the project timeline? And do we have the capacity to do the reporting that's required? Networking matters. This is particularly important for local and regional charitable organizations and foundations. Are we visible in the community? Is our contribution to the community valued and publicly recognized? What is our organization's reputation? Are we good partners, and have we worked together before on projects with success? The library has to work every day to make sure that we can answer those questions positively. For state and federal funding, the questions that we ask ourselves are, do we have the sound financial track record needed to make our application attractive? Is there a demonstrable need? Are we eligible? Those funds often come with population requirements, socioeconomic criteria, and we also have to consider whether the city is prepared to take on the complex requirements of those funding sources. That's something that Jeff can speak to. The reporting burden for state and federal funds is often much greater than that of a private foundation. Once we decide that a grant is a good fit and that we want to proceed with the application process, we have to research the grant priorities so that our application is tailored effectively. We look at past funded projects and we engage with grantor staff and representatives so that we clearly understand expectations. Grantor staff also give insights into the grant committee's preferences and often advise on how best to position our project. So there are often 1, 2, sometimes even 3 meetings that happen between city staff and grant funding staff before we even open up the application. Just as council relies on staff to present information and make recommendations on actions, so do many grant-making committees and boards. So it's essential to have a productive working relationship with their staff. Then we finally reach the stage of preparing and writing the grant application. We have to translate all of the work that I've just described onto paper or an online form. Each grant has a different process. Some require an invitation to submit an application. All have different forms with different questions. They request different financial information about the organization, and each application has to be tailored to those specific requirements. Sometimes an application requires input from other departments, which we as staff coordinate. Each application goes through multiple drafts and revisions to ensure clarity, compliance, and competitiveness. Once we hit submit, grantors often have a multi-step decision-making process. If we make it through an initial review, we may be asked to submit additional information, often more details about the proposed project or our organization's finances. Some grantors require site visits from their staff or board members. And for the library, this usually involves coordinating the visit with our foundation board members and city staff, like Jeff, the finance director, so that we are able to demonstrate broad support for the proposal and adequately answer any questions that may arise. Then we have to wait, or we try to wait patiently and hope that we have the opportunity to do what Chief Mitz is going to talk about and move on to that fund management.
Okay. Let's talk about managing those grants.
Yeah. Evening again. Well, Haley did a really good job explaining the process, and there's a lot of work that goes into the process. The management of grants is equally taxing on resources. Once those grants are received, we begin, and again, most of these grants, again, they're not a big check that comes immediately. We have to fund those positions and then we submit for reimbursement. But when handling grant management reporting, there must be systems. And these are generally records management software systems, like when the police department, all of our data is stored there, whether it be traffic stops, it could be arrests, it could be the number of crimes that we have in different categories. But they have to be in place for us to effectively report on these grants. Those grants, and the reports, I'll talk about them a little bit more here in a moment. It's also necessary because of the gotcha.
Feel like Dan?
So the other big part of this, and Haley mentioned that, is that we have stakeholders that are involved in this. For example, when we submit for the last grant that we had with or major COPS grant that we had for the community resource officer position, we went out, we established who our stakeholders were, our partners, so to speak, in the community in that mission. And we got letters of support from them, and they are actively listed and reported on our meetings and what we do with them throughout the reporting and management of that grant. But that requires us to update them to ensure that we're in alignment with our goals and adapt to any changes and challenges as they may come up. Staff must prepare quarterly reports, as I mentioned before, and final reports detailing accomplishments, challenges, and financial accounting. So this is basically a compiling of what we've accomplished, looking at it, analyzing whether or not we are in progress in meeting with the goal. That might be a quarterly report. Ultimately, at the end of our final report, we hope that we can say that we've accomplished those, but it's an ongoing and kind of checking the boxes as you go through it. Maintaining compliance with grant conditions is a must. It includes communications with the public. That could be press releases that we make, like for our traffic safety grants, the seatbelt grants, speed enforcement grants that we have. We generally will, even the pedestrian grants will go so far as to tell the public, hey, this is an important thing you need to watch out. And we actually will put out, say, we're going to be doing one of these operations. We're looking for violators that are not stopping for pedestrians. So that's an example of a press release that we would do. But then we also must again continue to maintain contact and discussion with our stakeholders. The other responsibilities and more importantly impacts include grant management produces increased workload. As you can see from what Haley mentioned, starting from the beginning of the application to what I'm describing now, it generally it requires the participation of multiple departments, city departments. For example, for the police department, we have a grant. Jeff and his team in the finance department are handling the financial side of that. So there's two different departments. There could be even three departments, depending on what type of grant it was. It could be another party that is involved in the grant outside the city even. Say, for example, if we had some sort of a grant with the tribal police department, which I've had before at SID. There's involvement of different department staff resources and potential involvement of the other departments that I described. This work by staff is important in maintaining the grant funding, stability of the resource and the funding that provides. It's important given the economic climate and budget conditions, it is imperative for this grant cycle to continue long-term. So this again is an ongoing process is what we do basically every day. We're constantly looking for grants, we're constantly reporting on the grants that we have. And this is something that going to have to continue into the future until, as we've looked at our budget, until that our main budget doesn't require these outside grants like that. I don't know if I see that in the near future, but that is the condition. And what I will tell you based on my history, when I was a director of the South Coast Interagency Narcotics team, as well as in the Coos Bay Police Department, when you have a setback and when you lose funding or you lose positions, you lose progress. If you've made progress at any type of work, whether it's work at the library, more important, or just as important, whether it be at the fire department or the police department, whatever you've gained, you lose positions and you lose funding, you're stepping backwards. And when it comes to public safety, for example, that's something that just it creates a very negative impact. And I think we've all experienced that as we've lost positions for one reason or another over the years. Any questions on that?
Thanks, Cal.
I have a question. How do you know when the grants are going to be available? And I mean, we just get bombarded with emails as to, hey, this grant period's going to be open and it's for this. Are you on all these mailing lists? Is that how you find out? Or
It's a very good question.
Where do you go to find out what's coming up?
Yes. So we are constantly, I guess, bombarded, as you say, but we do get those emails basically daily. I receive an email from one grant. Mostly it's a lot through the Bureau of Justice Assistance for the police department, through grants.gov, the different types of websites that they have, and it produces basically, and there, along with that, there is basically a season approach to this, to where we can see that we know from past experience that as spring generally comes in, we're starting to look pretty hard, because most of the time the grant awards come in the fall around October. It's been my experience, and deadlines generally come around July. So we're looking, like right now, we're in the process of applying for a grant for a position. And I think I talked about that last night, but that's how that generally works. But again, good question.
Chief.
Yes.
Citywide, can you give us any indication, or maybe Jeff, these are the grants that we applied for, and these are the ones that are successful. So these are the ones we applied for, these are the ones we were successful. Is there a measurement for that, and how successful are we compared to other?
We have a grant tracking database that shows what we go after versus what we have. The city has a 98% success rate since 2020 on obtaining grants.
So what are you doing with that other 2%?
we reapply and go after them. There's one that we have reapplied
Learn.
for the second year. We just got notified yesterday that we didn't get it, so we'll go after it again next year. And so we just don't give up. We also reach out to other agencies that may have applied and got those grants. We review their applications. We talk how they got it. We also network. For instance, there's a grant that one of our departments has submitted for. They reached out to the mayor. She actually graduated, I guess maybe high school or college, I don't know which, but they recently met with me this week and actually showed me behind the iron curtain what their process and what their scoring is, so that when we submit a grant application for our pocket park, that we have a leg up. So it's all about relationships. And I think that that's what you heard, is you build those relationships and you study what other folks have done so you don't make their mistakes. And you also get a lot of grant training and or someone to coach you or to review your applications before they're submitted so that they actually align. And so you heard Haley mentioned that she has additional eyeballs on. And so so we tag team one another, we help each other, and we review each other's work as a team effort.
Can I just add to that too? I think it's important to note that that when having that strategic plan and the goals in place, I think also really helps with the success of getting the, you know, this receiving those grants, and that you're not just going after random things that aren't sustainable. So it makes sense to somebody that might, maybe we're applying for a housing grant because that is in our strategic plan, we're doing other things for that. Or the pocket park has been part of the plan, and then somebody, you know, is aware that that is a goal that we have. So if you're going after, you know, something completely random and it doesn't make sense, then you're gonna have a less chance, I think, of getting those.
I think that's a requirement, especially the bigger the grants are, is you have to show that the individual type of, you know, whatever function it falls into, you have to show that it aligns to the entire tree of the city or the local area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a perfect example is, I will tell you that the most time-consuming grant and reporting is anything that has anything to do with historic preservation. So for instance, the Main Street grants are the most time-consuming. We literally will spend collectively about 20 hours just on the application, writing it. That doesn't include going out and getting everything else, documenting. And then, you know, I guess I could have brought one of the folders to show you the reporting. So not only are you doing the reimbursement forms, but you're also having to do the reporting and then the closeout reports. And so the Liberty Theater blade sign, the example, that folder is about that thick right now. And it's all document. And the amount of front end work that goes in, but then you're able to layer that and then look at what it does for the community. So the effort pays off. The point, however, is you will not get such a grant unless you could actually point specifically to, for instance, the Heritage Management Committee, our urban renewal plan, our actual council goals and strategic plan. And so without showing and threading that. So for those that think that a city manager just manages people, there's a whole lot of plans that get implemented collectively that then get implemented and realigned. And so, and by the way, the city of Lakeside will be looking for a new city manager. They just gave 30 days notice. So if any of you want to get in government, there'll be an opportunity coming available. I think they're reducing the salary down to about 40,000 is the proposed. So good luck to them.
I have a question.
Just a question, how has the level of grant funding changed since the pandemic, and when do you see that kind of, and we may have discussed this, but just for a little bit of pressure, has it changed drastically, and are we on the backside in a downhill slide, or what's our status?
So that's a great question. So obviously the federal grants go with the ebb and flows of whoever's in office, whether, you know, it's Republican or Democrat. So that generally, for instance, congressionally designated funding came back under the Democrat administration. State grants are pass-throughs generally through the agency, so the state gets a certain amount and they actually have to redole that out. I mentioned yesterday that until we have more skin in the game with our ratepayers, we can't go after, say, wastewater treatment plant. So there's a lot of money for that. You know, we can't go after it. We can't get it. Some cities will get, 20 to 40 million for wastewater. We're not eligible for anything. I've heard in the community of late that folks are like, everybody got ARPA money, stop giving your city credit for getting all those grants. We've had over 14.5 million worth of grants and only 2 million were ARPA. And we used that ARPA money strategically working with the city council to ladder grants for our matching because we don't have money we can just throw away. So we ladder grants and commingle. In fact, there was a meeting today at the Office of Homeless Response where the state was saying, absolutely, you can commingle and ladder grants. And that's how we have operated. So we take all of that relief, all of that stress off the general fund. The foundations, depending on how the market goes, like right now, they're getting great interest on their investments. And so they're able to give more. For instance, the Main Street program has said that they'll take their grants from about 200,000 to 400,000 each and allow you now to apply to potentially 2 because there's windfalls. And so it goes in ebbs and flows. So again, it's always about the strategic, whether it's a private foundation, whether it's the state, versus whether it's the feds. And then last but not least, the rule of thumb is that when the economy starts to tank, that's when government steps up and starts to reinvest in their community. And so that's actually when you start to see more. The pandemic was unusual. And so they were throwing a lot of money, but that money wasn't money coming to us. We got ARPA. That was our portion. If you look at where all of these other grants are, and so the council actually gets a report. They recently got the report. In fact, some of them may have it right in front of them because it was in their mailbox this week. It actually shows how much for every dollar that North Benders paid in property tax, how much we have returned back in grants. And you'd be surprised that it wasn't dollar for dollar. It was actually more than $1 in this current fiscal. It was since you have it, Councilwoman Jones, it shows what $1 is it 37, 87, 86 for the current fiscal year?
So for 2024, our taxes came in at 4.5 mil and our grants are 6.1 mil. So 136.9%.
Yeah.
Of property taxes were matched with grants through the efforts of the staffers. It's
exactly.
It's incredible and it's a new responsibility, as I understand.
Yes, and so outside of one state grant, the previous fiscal year that I got here, the city had brought in just over 9,000 in grants. Yes, $9,000. 2,900 of that was from the library. That's where the tides change. When you hear about fiscal stress, every single government here on the coast and elsewhere in the state are under fiscal stress. Coos Bay's deficit is running in excess of $2 million a year. The county is running well larger than that. It's not unusual to have the fiscal stress. The difference is North Bend decided with the changing council to take the bull by the horns and make it a strategic priority, which makes it my priority, which makes it the staff priority, which is why you see what you see occurring. And it goes back to what the mayor said. If the governing body doesn't take action, then it's not a priority. If it's not a priority, we have nothing to show. And so you'll see public hearings where we actually have to have a public hearing. There was one grant recently, which was the energy grant, where we actually had to come before the governing body because that was a grant requirement that we have to do that. So again, a lot of work, collective. That's a lot of chatter for one question, and so I'm going to shut up so that we can keep on marching on.
Well, I would add one other piece, and it's just that particularly once you hit and it's a very low threshold of federal dollar spending, there's an audit that happens by your external auditors. They audit what's called the single audit. They do a compliance audit with the direct and material compliance requirements of that particular federal grant, and so they test, and so they they're asking us for information and testing transactions, and then they write a report and they come back to city council and they'll say, hey, we found this, or they're doing a great job, but those federal dollars get a heavy eye on them once you reach a certain threshold of spending at the federal level. I believe it's $750,000 of federal grant spending. Once you hit that threshold, it triggers that single audit requirement. So, and there's
Yeah,
question.
just a quick question. Does the city ever go outside and have an outside grant writer?
On occasion, absolutely, we do. For instance, I'm on the board and the mayor's on the board of CCD. And so they get funds for technical assistance. And so for instance, I teamed them up with the police department and the library for technical assistance.
Okay.
And so sometimes depending on how much work is involved or the expertise within the department, and the police department is still growing and learning. They are focusing on their department, their agency, because basically it imploded and we've had to rebuild, and we all understand that and why. And despite whatever y'all read, it had nothing to do with David Miller, but that's okay. And so they're worried about management and building their department. So we teamed them up with outside resources to extend, very much like you heard the chief yesterday saying he extends with technology.
Right.
We extend. The library has great resources, but they actually were using technical assistance. So we used that. We also did the same thing when we were cross-training, working with Main Street, because we can only juggle so many grants.
Okay.
Then at the federal level, on the very large ones, we actually, I'm the point person for the federal grants, and we actually will engage, depending on the federal designated funds, a lobbyist. And so the first opportunity that Ralph's working on, which is 1.34 million, I did that my whole process. That was my work of going after that. Well, it consumed a lot, but I was brand new to the city, so I was still building. Okay. When we got to the annex project, we went for the max, which is 4 million. The mayor was at the League of Cities when they told us keep it below 2 million. Okay. And we said, no, we're going to go for the 4 million. So we needed to extend. So everyone had to hit on all cylinders. So when you see the league send the mayor to Washington, she's meeting with constituents. We have then coming back, the lobbyists working. And so the difference is we have to set ourselves apart and stay on the radar. And we can't do that unless we have someone working with us in Washington. We're doing the same thing with the community center. So, behind the scenes, I do all of the base work to get it to the point, and then they take it from there. And then the mayor has full disclosure. She sees the process from there, where we have to stay in front of them. But it's not just that. We have to then convince the rest of the legislative delegation, because it's like dog eat dog. And that's where they come to play, their relationships with others. Because we have our congressional delegation on speed dial.
Right.
Okay. I don't have the rest of the states that are in the region on that. And that's where that pays off. So depending on how much we're going after. And so, and like that current engagement is 35,000. We're going after 2.5 million. Okay. We spent 50,000 to go after 4 million, so it pays off. And when you look at a percentage, and so, because otherwise the money goes to Salem, Portland, and Eugene,
And the fact is,
because they have bigger pockets on their lobbyists.
and staff would be overwhelmed with those larger grants. There's just no way.
I don't boast this because the council, I actually appreciate the council's, saying life work balance. It tells me that the council actually cares about me and my health. But you did a report, the average, I forget how many hours, but we all work collectively because it's the end goal,
The number one priority in the city is secure long-term funding.
Yes,
And it doesn't, when you look at
Yeah.
the page, depends on what page you look at, but when you look at it, they're sort of organized by idea. But then if you look at the numbers and the letters and you find that 1A, that's the top, and that's long-term funding.
Right.
The prior council
Yep.
made that.
and then that's what I'm evaluated on. Well, you know that. I'm evaluated on the council. You're asking questions you know the answer to. I'm evaluated on the effectiveness of implementing council goals. That's where the buck stops. So.
So as we wrap that one up, and nobody asks any more questions. The administrator doesn't give any more answers. I would just like to thank the city staff and the council for that $14.5 million. That we brought. Thank you.
A sitting ovation there, Brian. What separates us from other governments right now on the coast? It's why we're positioned 5 years out.
Okay, so question 2, can you explain why an unappropriated fund balance is important? Why can't we shore up the police pool, July Jubilee or whatever with our unappropriated funds? The answer is unappropriated fund balance is essentially the money that hasn't been budgeted for spending by the government or by the city. In the city budget, it is what is expected to be left over at the end of the year or the remaining fund balance. Budgets having no unappropriated fund balance means that all of the resources in that fund are expected to and can be spent. So to the extent there is a budgeted unappropriated funding ending fund balance, that's really money that won't be touched. It's not been appropriated and would be available then for the next year's budget.
Why is it important to have a pile for next year when we're talking about this?
Yeah, I think when you look at kind of your long-term, your long-range financial forecasting, you're going to have ebbs and flows of cash flows. There's also, every year is kind of different with different initiatives. And so it gives you flexibility in your future budgets, where you're not just nail biting. Oh my gosh, I'm only going to get this much and I've got to spend it all. And where's it going to come from? So it's like having kind of that savings account. We do that in a couple other areas too. There's another slide that we'll talk about rainy day funds as well.
Is this is also, is it important to note here, or is it in the other line item that property taxes, like we need that in funding balance because of when property taxes hit, or is that at another line item?
Well,
Property taxes of the
That's the
year.
gap between.
right. So that's the working capital, and there is a gap between our start of our fiscal year in July and when we actually collect the property taxes, which is in November.
Then is this the bucket that helps with that, or am I
So-
doing something else?
It's your beginning working capital that helps out with that.
So one of the biggest reasons, Jeff and I tag team because we sometimes speak different language. At the end of the day, if you don't have that fund balance there, this unappropriated fund, and you have an emergency that's excessively high, and you're not going to be able to cover that at all. And so you don't necessarily, we budget for sort of rainy day funds and emergency funds, but you also then can have unappropriated fund across everything that collectively looks like a big figure. The beginning working capital is obviously when you start of what are we going to project that we have available at the start of the budget, is because our budget starts July 1st. And as you suggested, the taxes don't start coming in until November. So there are two approaches to this. One is that the government uses that fund balance to pay all of the bills and operating in July, August, September, October, and November, because then money's come in and it's reimbursing us usually about the end of November, December. The second option is go out to the market and take what's called a tax anticipation note that says, I'm going to go get a loan because I don't have money. And so I'm going to pay interest on that loan. And so when you have fund balance, it's smarter to use your own money, very much like we did with the fire truck. And so at the end of the day, we saved the citizens over $233,000 because we structured it in-house, and then we had a windfall and we're able to pay it back. If you'd committed out and you actually had to pay, and if you had any prepayment loans plus the interest, then the taxpayers paying that. So they've paid their taxes, but then you're using their money and taxing. And so that's where all of the training comes in, and the certifications and the expertise. And then always helps to, have a finance person on the council, and so those are the two things that occur. So those are the two big reasons, and if you are in some of these cities like Talent, or other that got wiped out by fires, you're going to best wish that you had some money there to operate, because the feds aren't going to be here next week or next month. You have to have those contingency and those emergency management plans in place for a disaster. There are folks in the community that look and say, wow, you're sitting on all this money. How come you can't shore up? Okay, because you'd be foolish to do so, because then if you needed money in emergency, where are you going to get it?
Whatever.
Yeah. How fast do you think you can get a loan when you can't show that you can repay it because you've just had a disaster?
Right.
Or that you don't know when that money's going to come in because your fees that are wiped out. So again, there's a couple things, but there are what's called the Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA. There's GASB, generally accepted, the Government Accounting Standards Board, and then there's GAAP, the Generally Accepted Accounting Standards and Practices. All of those is what we apply to the budget for best practices, and we're required by law then to show a balanced budget. So every penny has to be shown on the books, and that's how we do the unappropriated fund balance, is we have to transparently show it to you and then explain why.
And a lot of times that unappropriated balance is the piece that is the balancing piece.
Right.
So as you shift revenues and expenses, that unappropriated number shifting as well.
That was very well explained, but
Yeah.
We make a great team. We really do. We both have different certifications, and so we tag team each other. And so I love having Jeff on board.
Right. When existing working capital is higher than expected, does that mean it can be used to bridge the gap between expenses and revenue? Yes. Working capital is an estimate that is used for budgeting purposes to anticipate the resources the city will have as of the start of the fiscal year. Working capital is estimated based on last year's audited ending fund balance, adjusted for the current year spending to arrive at where we realistically believe the beginning resources will be at the beginning of the year. To the extent actual resources exceed that estimate, they're available to pay for budgeted expenses.
And so I guess I can chime in and say, in my first year here, I guess about 6 months in, it was a different finance director, but I came to the council and said, we found over $1 million on the books. I was hired here. The first thing the mayor, she was a council member at the time, but she's like, can you find $500,000 to open the pool? And I looked and studied the book, studied the budget, everything. No, it's not there. And I came back to her and says, it's not there. However, we were also behind on our audits, and we were behind on reconciling all of our bank statements. And so we worked night and day, literally. And I give huge kudos to Jessica Terra, because she would work almost 7 days a week with me on this. And we worked painstakingly to make sure that before we went to the council, made an announcement that there was over 1.2 million, that it was there. The council did the right thing, because we also needed to go to figure out how we were going to salvage all of the issues, catastrophic failures with the pool. And so the council agreed, and those that were on the budget committee remember that if the public would agree to the levy for operations, the city would figure out how to come up with the capital. There's not a lot of grants for capital to fix pools. Okay, and so we had to leverage everything we could. We had the Judith Mogan Foundation, which was the largest grant. And then we were able to get some operational money. And so working through that process and then Jeff coming in, taking over is how we were able to do all of that capital on something that otherwise would not have had grant money attached to it. We squeezed every bit of grant money we could for the pool. And so if you look at the grant thing, you'll see there's not a lot, but there was, roughly about $500,600,000 that was grant money attached to the pool. And so that's a perfect example where we saw the excess and we knew that it wasn't recurring. And so how best to use it. And that's why we took it to the council.
Yeah, I think I would just add to that. I think last year when I first got here and was doing my first budget, I spent a lot of time thinking about the working capital because I felt like they'd been maybe historically low in the budgets. And it wasn't really matching up with like the cash in the bank. To me, like cash is king and we've got these resources. It seemed more transparent to like, okay, let's put on the books and working capital an estimate of really where we think we're going to be. And so, I look at the cash in the bank and I do a projection of the current year revenues and expenses in each fund and then annualize those amounts to come up with where I think we're going to be and then kind of adjust each fund for, known one-time spending, things that aren't going to be recurring in those funds to come up with an estimate. Because I think really working capital is your cash and we want to get as close to that as possible. Why is replacing our road double the cost, $1 million a mile versus $2 million per mile to repair? And Ralph, come on up and talk about new roads versus repairing of roads.
Bring your calculator.
That's okay.
The versus is better. It should have been why is repairing double.
Yeah, right.
But you got it.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's-
Well, it's very similar to a remodel. You got to tear it down. That costs money. Plus, typically when you're looking at a new road, $1 million a mile, that's built out in a location where there's no traffic. So you're doing a road repair when you're rebuilding an existing road. You're going across bare ground. You build everything to fit your new road, all your appurtenances, your utilities, your sidewalks, your disabled access ramps. Everything is built to fit with, and since you're working not in the middle of the public, usually, you're not dealing with interruptions. So take that, you have to remove what's there. Stuff doesn't fit because you got to blend it. Mr. Richardson's driveway, which is 3 feet higher than it should be. And he busted out the curb and didn't get a permit. So now it's all crumbled up. So we had to replace that curb.
It's not true. Please, for the
not true.
record.
I knew Bill would laugh at me. So A, you're fixing some issues that exist. B, you're working in an interrupted status. I mean, you've been in lines for traffic control. They get to work for 20 minutes. They stop and let everybody through. So it's just an inefficient process. And typically you don't get bulk product out all at once. What I mean by that is I'm not paving 1,000 tons in 2 days. I'm paving 1,000 tons in 2 weeks because I'm doing it in short spurts at 100 tons a day type thing because I'm fixing as I go, because I gotta let you get home at night after I got done tearing up your driveway. So I'm doing also some temporary stuff, interim stuff to provide access. I'm dealing with traffic control. Everything's less efficient and can't get the big machines in there to do it the easy way, that type of thing. And that's really the main reason. It just doubles your cost because of the.
That makes total sense. Thank you. I was just like.
Thanks, Ralph. Can you detailed shared, staffing shared across funds? It's illuminating to see how admin salaries are split across funds. And I combine this with another question because we had a similar one. How is personnel expenses assigned to the various funds? Overhead transfer rate, question mark. And our answer is page 110 of the budget document. Contains a personnel by department and fund, which shows by position the allocation that is used for personnel services. We have not changed the allocation significantly, and generally they have remained consistent. One change that is notable in this budget is the CSL FRF fund, which is the ARPA money, no longer having a budget as the grant is now spent. That fund had 1.78 FTE assigned to it in the previous budget, and those costs are now assigned to the general fund, and they were for the police department. So it's that chart that is that will tell you the allocation by fund and by department for the city's personnel. So it's cross-functional. You can see the departments, you can see the funds going across the top, and then you can see the total FTE by fund going across the bottom. So I guess some things to consider when like looking at allocations is, you know, we do consider how much time is spent by each personnel. Yeah, in each activity. And if a particular fund maybe will have less, then maybe we would shift that allocation. Or if we had a special grant come in that was going to pay for a position, we would maybe shift something out of a general fund and move it into a different grant fund. But those are generally the reasons why we would change a personnel allocation.
So I think that's a good thing to point out because in another meeting we had last night for the URA, there was a public comment question that somebody had asked if like, for example, the city administrator was noted in there as, I think it was like $10,000 per salary. So if just glancing at it, it could look like it's an additional $10,000 for the salary. But is there a formula? Like, how do you just kind of take your best guess of this is how much time this position spends towards the URA, so I'll bill in a sense part of my salary to that fund?
So if you look at that matrix, I can only add up to 100%. Okay, so that first tells you that the money I get is the 100%, but how we charge back. So I wear multiple hats at the city. And so if I am the city administrator managing the city, but I'm also the executive director managing the urban renewal agency, we then have to figure out or estimate or guesstimate how much of my time is on the urban renewal agency. I suspect, in fact, Jeff and I were talking, although we haven't made any changes, that as we move forward to some of these large infrastructure projects, either I'm going to move more of my time towards the urban renewal agency because they're very large projects, or the URA is going to go out and hire someone to do what I normally would be doing based on workload. And so all of these are basically calculated estimates. There is no formula, there's no physical accounting, if you will. We estimate based on the projects. It's very much like when Ralph in Public Works will put together a project, they can estimate based in sort of the architectural world or the engineering world, how much time it's going to take for the tasks. Okay, so he tends to have, and he'll tell you, this is my estimate, and either it was good or bad, you know, we try our best case scenario. So that's the same thing with this, is we try to allocate based on a realistic expectation of how much time you're spending there.
So I know I can talk now. It's obviously not an additional $10,000. It's so.
It is not.
We got that covered.
Got that covered, and it's all on page 110.
I would say too, that I think it's important to have a very sound reason to change an allocation. It is something that you likely will get questioned on, especially when you're dealing with grants. They'd want to know how you arrived at your allocations. That's a very common question. And I also think it's important to have some consistency from year to year because, you know, when you're looking at expenditures, those are your services that you're providing to the citizens and having a true cost that's comparable year over year and not having them move all around because of a bunch of allocation changes, I think is really important as well.
Yeah, that's true, because you have to report regularly, so if you have a bunch of shifts, that always makes someone say.
Flag them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No flag.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you want to be careful with your allocations. It's an important, I appreciate the question because it's an important assumption that goes into building the budget.
And so that you know, if you look at, say, Coos Bay's budget. In the back, they also have an allocation table. And so this is generally accepted accounting standard practice. But it's not something that the public understands because they don't always recognize. They see the Royal City and they just assume, well, it's just the city. Well, we have other governmental agencies. You know, we have our city planner over here. Well, he also is the executive director of what?
Historic landmarks.
Exactly. And so he actually wears multiple hats. And then you have Stephanie, who's, you know, visitor information center. But she's also working with me with urban renewal, but she's also working with me on Main Street. So again, you have to look at the allocations and where the funds are coming from for the positions. And last but not least, same thing with code enforcement, code compliance, as I like to call it. The position used to be, and it is funded out of Public Works, but it makes better sense to actually have that position in the police department and working. So what we did is we stratified the position. If you see the allocation, so Public Works is paying for portion and police because code enforcement or code compliance isn't a full-time job because it's complaint based. And then they can support the police department when they're not doing code enforcement. And so it is a shared allocation, but spread across the different funds, general fund versus a business type fund.
Hey. When would the city ever use a rainy day fund?
Never in North Bend because like it never rains.
It never rains, right?
Never rained without some shade.
That's right. The question of when to access an emergency reserve fund is a great question and one that needs further definition by the city of North Bend. A rainy day fund is formally referred to as a stabilization agreement. The authority is set the authority to set aside those amounts comes from statute, ordinance, resolution, charter, or constitution. Stabilization amounts may be expended only when certain specific circumstances exist. The formal action that imposes the parameters for spending should identify and describe the specific circumstances under which a need for stabilization arises. Those circumstances should be such that they would not be expected to occur routinely. For example, a stabilization amount that can be accessed, quote, in an emergency would not qualify because the circumstances or conditions that constitute an emergency are not sufficiently detailed. And it is not unlikely that an emergency of some nature would routinely occur. Similarly, a stabilization amount that can be accessed to offset a quote anticipated revenue shortfall would not qualify unless the shortfall was quantified and was of a magnitude that would distinguish it from another revenue shortfalls that occur during the normal course of governmental operations. So it's a recommendation that the city council take a look at making a formal action to define specifically the circumstances under which emergency reserves or that rainy day fund may be accessed. It's a lot of this was right straight from GASB accounting, like this is what they're for. And
That'd be like natural disasters, something like that. Right?
yes, it could be. Yeah.
Yeah. Unforeseen, not expected. Versus, well, we just did a piss poor job at budgeting and whoops, we're running out of money, so we better go cap it.
It's a rainy day. We need to
Yeah.
have an emergency.
Totally two different things, which is
Yeah.
of course why we realigned our emergency management plan and emergency powers.
And I think kind of step one in this process for the city was just getting it established in that emergency reserve. Now it's identifiable. Now let's, think about it and put those parameters of when we would hit that reserve and when we should just leave it alone. Is working capital so high because of grants from prior years? Yes, working capital is higher because of grants from prior years. Grants such as ARPA, wildfire prevention, for example, have provided resources for expenditures that otherwise would have come from the general fund. The general fund has benefited from temporarily not having to exhaust its resources on things like new fleet purchases and certain personnel expenses. In addition, working capital has benefited from higher than expected investment returns on the city's deposits of its excess funds. So there's several layers of that though, but having the grants, and that emphasizes really the importance of them. If we're able to spend non-general fund money on things, with grant money on those, it allows us to, not spend that money and reserve it and keep it.
So here's a key piece, and this is always one of those sayings like, that's interesting. Because there's not a day that goes by that I say, that's not interesting. Okay. So for the committee members, you may not be aware, but you heard earlier, it's like, hey, we paid off the fire truck. We saved, significant, it was 322,000 or 233,000. So you see in here, in addition, working capital has benefited from higher than expected investment returns on its deposits of its excess funds. So we work with the state and its investment pools to strategically put money, and we move money, sometimes on a weekly basis, got to make, payments, payroll, all that. But because the interest rates of the pool are very favorable, we had a windfall. So rather than take that windfall and go out and say, let's just spend it on something, I went to the council and said, it behooves us to pay back our storm water and get that liability off the books when we can. Because who knows what will happen in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. And granted, the interest rate we were getting from Ralph and the wastewater treatment plant, Michael Jordan, was great. The chief, fire chief negotiated an awesome rate. I think they actually waterboarded Ralph. But the bottom line is that collectively we were able to do that. What I haven't been hearing from the other governments is what they're doing with their windfalls. Just food for thought. We're good stewards of North Bend's money because the council and the budget committee are good stewards. And anyone that says otherwise, I challenge them to take our budget and our audits and put them up against the other cities on the coast any day. That's where we're helping the North Bend and being good stewards. And so when you hear folks say, oh, when you have to go ask money, we make a contract, very much what we did with the levy. You do X, we will do Y. And we have met the transparency, the relationship, and the trustworthiness of that bond and made it happen. And that's the relationship of the governing body, the budget committee, and the staff. So I challenge any other government out there, what are y'all doing with your windfall? You know what the state is. In fact, the state had so much, they're like, man, what are we going to do about the kicker? Look at their surplus. That's why they had announced that the Main Street grant would go from 200,000 to 400,000. So we're waiting for that to be solidified in paperwork, and we're hoping that that is true. And so just ask your fellow governments that question.
Yeah, and most governments, they use that same pool that we do, the local government investment pool. That's where their excess funds are going. That's where the return's been excellent.
And then ask them what their percentage of grants are. Just saying.
Can you give a high-level summary of what the annex project is so far?
Yeah, it's about 4 stories right now. Is that high enough? And so So as I mentioned, I believe yesterday, we've got the paperwork, we're starting the process. We have to actually go through the whole process of having a contract that is jointly executed. The project then, we have to go through the State Historic Preservation Commission. We will also have some brownfield abatement. We got a grant to abate that because of underground storage tanks, so that'll be done during the demolition. We will do a request for proposals so that anything that can be salvaged out of that, in fact, all the metal, the copper, all of that, salvage, takes all that and tries to make as much money back. Our goal is, if we can get $125,000 from salvage, then the building was free to us. Keep in mind, when we negotiated, purchased that building through the URA, we got 2 free additional lots. Those are the lots, one of which is where the ice skating rink is. So we actually, whether or not you want to say, we got the building for free. That was a negotiate, but it was a compact with the county that we would work on housing. So we estimate early next year that the demolition will occur. It will not sit idle. The goal is to actually do everything in transom so that we get past SHPO, historic preservation. We get past the salvage. We then move to take care of the brownfield issues while at the same time as demolition as a combined. And then we have the developer lined up to actually start building immediately because of the grade issues. So we want to be able to have that lined up in tandem. We are working with the state. The state agencies have been a godsend. We actually have developers that have been coming in town that we've been meeting with them. We will put all of that on the street. It is actually a competitive bid process. The number one question I get is it going to be local contractors? I'd love it to be local contractors. But a job of that size, because it has to be prevailing wage, and well, you can even talk about the demolition. It is highly unlikely that they'll meet the thresholds and requirements of the procurement and Fed. That's not a David Miller issue, not a city issue. I have to follow the state and the federal procurement. It's the same thing that Ralph is having to go through right now with the stormwater process. And just read the documents that he's having to put on the street. It is the process that we have to go through. That's not to say that a large contractor couldn't hire local subs. That's through them as to what, but we cannot get in the way. We can't influence it. Otherwise, they'll take the money away. So we have to follow their process. So that's really a high level. I have a concept in my mind what the building will look like, but again, it's a concept. The council has seen some of the concepts, and it's not concepts we've had. It's like when we're going out and traveling, I take photos or I say, hey, come take a look at this, see this. The reason is because it's unique. You go from McPherson down to Union and there's a huge grade. So in my concept is that on Union, on the first floor, there will be office space. Off of McPherson, you would come into a parking garage, so that is a first floor parking garage, that you have housing above that, and then the top floor has a sort of walking, jogging path. You have a dog pet area, you have grilling areas, things of that, because it's got a beautiful view of the entire surrounding Bay Area. So it is a huge asset. We also potentially want to do it green up there with grass and stuff to try to make it as zero net neutral, because there's a lot of energy money that's going to be able to save on the project by making it as close to net neutral as possible on energy efficiency for the project. So that's a high level.
You're ready when I probably get weekly phone calls on people are so anxious for it to go to the salvage company because
They want stuff.
in there, they want a doorknob, they want that. So the salvage
They'll
company
know.
will be busy.
They'll know because we will heavily in the RFP. We want people who want things or know things to be able to connect with them, because in fact, someone wants the lettering on the side. We can't take anyone in there right now. It's an insurance issue. So we haven't taken anyone in there. for their safety. We've had vagrants break in. And so that place right now is sealed up like a fortress. And seriously, if you walk around, you'll see, I mean, doors are welded shut, big, huge blocks, even the old ladder. I mean, they've done everything. And so when Congresswoman Val Hoyle and her staff was there, I said, here's as much as you can get access to. And she was on her tippy toes looking in, and you see, where a camp was set up inside. That's the reality. So we manage all of that as best we can.
It's a really cool tour, all the jail cells in the basement and then the people on the top. It was an awesome tour. What, 3 years ago?
Basement, Shanghai tunnels.
So we've been going just a little over an hour now. How's everybody doing?
Well, I was looking to see how many slides you had left to figure out if we need.
We have a few more. Yeah.
Me too. I gotta buy a break.
Shoot.
That's okay. That's good.
How?
How much more longer?
We have several more slides to go
Yeah.
through, probably a little over halfway.
Yeah, we'll talk less.
We'll talk, some of them will be pretty brief, I think, to get through. One of them will take a little bit longer to talk about.
Let's take 5.
Okay.
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 I'm back here at 6:47.
Okay.
All right.
Grab the cookies out of the fridge. Just in case someone wants for dessert.
Personnel costs for 25 are an additional $481,000 over 24. Do we know the increase from 23 to 24? Employee increase cost is 481,000. Wow. And so I took two of those comments and combined them for this one. And I want to and I want to say I appreciate this comment because it made me go back and kind of relook at this slide and that number. And I'm going to explain what that number really represents. And it was really a rush, I think, on my part to put that number down. And so this is, I think, part of kind of kicking the tire process. I do really appreciate. But to answer the question that was posed, the increase for non-represented employees from fiscal year 23 to fiscal year 24 was budgeted to be $72,600 increase. And then I said, ... but wait, there's more to this story. So kind of in looking at just the change from fiscal year 23 to 24, one of the things I noticed is that, you know, you're looking at different personnel and there's a different mix in each year. And then also FTE changes. And so even, you know, one or two employees can make a pretty big difference when you add up all of the salaries and benefits. But I'm pleased to report, and you'll see in this next slide, that we're not proposing an additional $481,000 increase in talking the same thing as what that 72,600 increase was. So what that number is if you look at our fiscal year 24 budget, our non-represented personnel had budgeted for it $4,848,300 with 41 FTE. Under the old scales, before we changed them to market, in our proposed budget, we added a 3.2% COLA and just rolled our scales forward. And when you do that, you come up with a $4,483,573 amount. That was under using the old scales and applying a COLA to it. And you can see that's actually $364,733 less than what we had budgeted in the 24 budget. So it's not as much. I'll talk a little bit about why that's not as much. One of them is there's fewer FTE that's being budgeted. But then let's get to where I came up with the number that was in the slide. When you look at our non-represented 2024 budget, again, that same number, 4,848,300. When you juxtapose that against the new scales, the one that are actually in the budget now, so that's those revised new scales that includes a 3.2% COLA, in addition to a market adjustment. The number that's in the budget is $4,752,906. And that difference is only $95,394 less than last year's budget. So it's very comparable to last year's budget. But when you look at the difference between those two proposals, between the 364,733 and the 95,000, it's 269,339. Now, the other pieces that made up the other difference was in the two scenarios I was comparing, and this is where I rushed. In the scenario that we have in the budget right now, it had 4 extra positions in it that were added by staff coming to me as we were refining the personnel budget. So we had to, you know, even that out to show that. And then there was some minor changes with SAFE that needed to be applied. So we really weren't comparing apples to apples in that comparison. So what I was trying to say in that 481 was really that was the difference in what I was originally thinking was the difference between the two alternatives that I was evaluating to put into the budget. When I just compare last year's budget to this year's budget, we're actually lower in our personnel costs. for the, for the, what that is. We're lowering our personnel costs, or what's being rolled forward in the budget. And I know that's a lot to throw at you and, but I really appreciated the question because it first made me go back and look at that 23 to 24 budget to budget, and then do the same thing budget to budget for what I was originally thinking of including in the proposed budget versus what actually is in the proposed budget. So what is in the proposed budget, you can see like there's two alternatives that we were evaluating here, and we chose the one that was just a little bit less than last year's, not the one that's significantly less than last year's. What are some of those reasons? Healthcare benefits had changed some. The FTE is a little bit lower. We also carved out and didn't budget for the vacation payouts. We're really not seeing those occur very often. And then in some of the PERS retirements as well. So there's kind of a multitude of things that I think we've refined in our system now, where before I think the way we were doing it was we would put a lot of information into a spreadsheet and kind of like, let's look at worst case scenario. And now the software that we have very deliberately makes you put in, each component and extrapolates that to each employee. So it's actually kind of very detailed the way it is. So the good news is we're not proposing a $500,000 increased personnel expenses, but there is a pretty significant difference in the two alternatives between simply taking last year's non-represented scales and applying a COLA to it, 3.2%, or adjusting those non-represented scales to a market rate that includes the COLA as well. So that's the difference that we're looking at.
Can I ask the chair? I think it's important for this body to ask any clarifying questions on this, because this could be a big piece of misinformation that's out there, like, oh, the city of North Bend is raising salaries $500,000. And I just want to make sure that because I feel like this is the group that needs to share the correct information. And so I need to make sure I can articulate it as well. So the bottom right number, the 269,339.
Yes.
Is that the increase in salaries
That is the difference between the two alternatives
between the
that
two?
we evaluated to put into the budget. So if we were to just roll forward last year's existing schedules that we already have in place and apply a slight COLA to that, we would be budgeting $364,000 less than what was in the budget last year for non-represented employees. If we go with the market adjusted rates with the COLA included in it as well, we're only going to be $95,000 less than last year's budget, but in both cases, we're budgeting lower than what was in last year's budget for non-represented. So it's an important distinction, and it's an important difference, and there is the potential for misinformation too that says we're trying to increase salaries by $500,000. We are not saying that.
So if we go away and come back tomorrow, can you save us some more money?
Jeff, what page is this in the budget is the best way to see these numbers?
So this actually isn't in the budget. I don't think we break down well, let's see. There might be. Give me one moment here.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's not broken down by, so when we put personnel into our software, it's based on groups, non-represented police, fire, and then we've also got volunteers and that sort of thing as well. So we do not currently have a chart in the budget document that shows that breakdown by the different groups. Can certainly add that.
You said half of the people, like almost half of the people are not represented.
They are. Our total, annual payroll, benefits, all that is in that $8 to $9 million range. So. But what is, just to be clear, what is in there now is just slightly lower than what was in last year's budget, by $95,000.
So the $364,000 difference, is that strictly going from 41 to 38.94 FTEs?
That and last year's, no, not, there's other items in there in terms of like healthcare cost changes on our employee mix.
Just the package.
It's the pack, it's, yeah.
I think that people are tired too and then thoughts.
Yeah, if, people are, well, but this would exclude firefighters, but they're in a different bargaining group.
For instance, I think it's 2.06 is if I do math correct. And so I know the library has eliminated one position. Also the council's aware that through the parks and the pool where we consolidated a department head. And so instead of 2, I was able to go to 1 and then restructure. So I did some restructuring in staff. And so those are 2 positions. And the 0.6 person will, I don't know, I think I lost them on the elevator. But in the calculations, I don't know where that is, but 0.6 or, and so you have that, but that you have all in. Okay, so for instance, like, I'll give me an example. I have a salary, then I have health benefits that I pay portion of. When we budget for an individual of a position, let's say that we're going to hire a school resource officer. We don't know yet who that person is, so we have to budget full freight for that person as if they have family coverage. And so we have to have those versus as employees have changed, Jeff is able, because those are actuals, they're here, we know who they are. And so these numbers will ebb and flow and change as staff has changed. When on the represented side, say when the folks have left and so you hear the fire department say, well, they come in at a less cost, you still have then the plus of everything. You just don't have like longevity pay. You don't, have the higher pay stats. Anyone who then thinks that representatives all just cap out and they get nothing, because I heard that statement yesterday, that is an absolute false statement. Okay, because if they cap out on the scale, then there's longevity and other things because they have been here. And so you have, 2 of the largest unions here. They'll tell you that their folks aren't going to top out and then take nothing. And so that's why that figure I gave you was between 9.6 and 9.8 just year over year on one of the particular unions. And so when we do the CBA approvals, Jeff comes and then shows the council the actual numbers broken down by the category of the CBA. We don't go this far, although it's public record, but we don't show the individual salaries. We also then have situations where folks that are in the non-represented, if they are eligible and they retire, and we hire them back, no longer do we have to pay their 6% of PERS. And so through 2035, they're eligible to be hired back. And so we are able to hire them back at less expense to the taxpayer and keep a good, solid employee. And so those are done as management individual decisions because they're already getting their retirement benefits. And so therefore, we don't have to then contribute the additional 6%. So those are individual things that factor these numbers. And I appreciate the look back because I was having a heart attack yesterday when I saw it. Because believe it or not, I don't see everything up front. I didn't know that 400, but I was like, holy, so when I heard one council member say, wow, I was like, whoa. And so I get it, but again, you know, we're all human, and so he did a look back to actually do a finer look
Well,
at the
thank you.
numbers.
Well, and also what I heard was, and I think it's a good idea, is let's put some information in here about salaries and benefits by unit or by the different units. So you'd see something in there for streets, non-represented, fire, police. You can see a breakdown of all that, and we can certainly do that. And I think would be helpful for making meaningful comparisons.
Yeah, I think, so you're on the school board budget committee, so is this a fair statement? Pretty much all of the equivalent of the revenue that comes in tax on the school district, is that almost 100% salary? And then
Oh, yeah. their
yeah,
personnel
so
costs are
that's
huge.
it. To run the school districts, it's, you know, it's going, no matter what government you're at, it's your largest asset, and you can call it a liability, but it's your largest asset that you're paying for, bar none. And so that's just the reality. And then if the private industry could do it more affordable and cheaper, they would. But that's why government exists, is because we actually provide services that folks can't make money on. It's just the reality.
Okay. So. Status of Old Bay Area cleaners that was purchased with URA funds. Can you update us on Bay Area cleaners project? Is 200,000 spend for remodel of building yet?
So I'll jump in on this.
Yep.
Boy, that's small print, but I know this by the back. All right, so we have multiple projects. So this is a 2-year trans project. We purchased the property with URA funds. Those funds will be 100% reimbursed under the grant. And then we will have a blighted building that we will then renovate, put back on the tax rolls, and increment. So you've seen a lot of work go on that building, and so it is in a process. You go through your brownfield, you go through cleaning up, you know, like we had to get all the trees off, we had to take care of the fence in the back. You know, we're working with the adjacent property owner on access because there's never been an access agreement. They want to actually have that parking lot paved in cooperation with us, and they'll pay their portion. We're working on the request for proposals on being able then to go out and have the exterior taken care of. So we are starting that process, but we had moved some of our priority resources because, as you see, we don't grow in staff, we use our existing. And so I'm very grateful, you know, that Derek over there does a lot of architectural work, and then Ralph does a lot of the engineering, and then he pulls folks from parks and streets and everyone as manpower. But we moved to move very quickly on the North 40 Ciccarelli's building to turn that as quickly as we could to get them open so that we could actually make that positive revenue back to the Urban Renewal Agency. We are also simultaneously working, our staff is working on the Salon Bella. And at the same time, our staff is also working on the Visitor Information Center, while at the same time, our staff is also working on the library. And then they also have all of their other, while we're also working on the annex, and we're working on the old visitor center and that remediation and hazardous materials so that we can get that for demolition. So there's all these juggle acts that staff do, which is why you go back to that nice matrix as to where we spend our time and how we build back our services, because we wear those multiple hats. So this is a 2-year project. I handle all of the reporting on this project. I've been managing the Main Street reporting. Stephanie helps me with photos and blips and things, but I'm actually handling the finance side and working with the state. In fact, I have the year-end reports coming up on both projects too. So that's where we are. The question is the tortilla factory. We are not so sure that they're going to move forward, but that's okay. Again, do we have a backup plan or even a C plan? Absolutely. We already have interest by another entity. We're not gonna say who, because we don't get into their business yet. But they have a huge interest in working with us in that building. And so that's a positive thing. And sorry, Madam Mayor, it's not a cleaners. I love a dry cleaner in town. I really would. I think the police chief would love a dry cleaner. Instead of having to press their own stuff. But so in this next fiscal year, we'll actually see the money come back for the actual purchase. We have to spend a certain amount because it was a matching grant. So when you buy a building for 200,000, it was like actually 195,000 or 175,000 plus closing or something like that, give or take. But shy of 200,000, and then you get a grant for 2,000. It is, was it 30% match?
Yeah.
So we will have spent 60,000. So we record everything that Derek does. We record everything that Ralph and his teams, and then I submit that as billable plus the fence, all that. And then once we hit the 260, they send us a check back for 200,000, which is why I then ladder it with, say, brownfield money, in order to do abatement on asbestos and stuff like that. So we try to make all that work.
And just if it's okay to ask a question, I think that was some of the community questions I had, is that that grant wasn't contingent on it being a tortilla factory. It was contingent on removing lights. New projects.
Yes, and we also continually put out that no, the tortilla factory and Angelina's did not get $200,000. Everyone thinks that they, and it's like, where do you get that? But read the headline. Don't allow the facts get in the way of a good story, but that's the reality. No, that is 100% URA to URA project with the Main Street board.
Can you give us a hint? Is it like food?
You're funny. See, she's even on the council and it's like, no. Yeah, I appreciate that. But no.
Yeah, it ain't gonna be tortillas.
Yeah.
But it might. It might.
All right. Here's a question. Page 115, $5,000 for a printer, question mark. Yes, Public Works is budgeted for a new copier printer to replace its old one. $5,000 includes lease payments for 1 year, service agreement, copy charges. Actual expenditures likely will not exceed this amount for fiscal year 25. You look at all of the copying that they do, they're kind of in the permits and plans, and they have a lot of copy needs. And Ralph, how long have you had your existing? 7 years.
Last copier I bought is Smith Engineering was 29,000.
Okay.
I was just wondering, do we ever look at refurbished equipment? Does it always have to be new?
We could get into a copier company, talk on that. Ours, as it sits right now, we're in more of a throwaway society than we used to be. You can't even buy parts for the one we have right now. You get for that. Most copier leases are 5 years. And there's a reason for that.
And is there a maintenance agreement with that?
There's a maintenance agreement with it, and
Warranty.
this particular one, I think we could buy outright for 7,000. With the finisher, it was 4,800 for just the copier. We got 3 quotes on it. This isn't. We got 3 quotes on it.
The other thing on this page was the Kubota mower.
There was a Kubota mower, yes, and there was a golf.
So I was
that
just
too.
wondering, so I just saw the commercial for Kubota, you have 0% down and 0% interest for 84 months. So why are we doing that?
Tony, I can speak to that.
Yep.
We're looking moving forward, the end of this year, again, my mower's 13 years old when I'm going to replace it, so functioning this year. We did put aside 25,000 for that. Talked to the company, the new mower, diesel, the front deck, big enough for the 40 acres remote. It's gonna run probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 28,000, but we trade in 0%. They're gonna honor all that when we do it.
Okay. Good.
So I worked with people down in Grants Pass. Pretty much ahead of the curve on what we're gonna do. And hopefully at the end of the year, so I don't beat it all up until next year. There you go.
But just to kind of circle back on the copier situation, this isn't, there's a reason why you can't just buy a $500 Walmart copier. These are for commercial use, certain printing.
Exactly, and the only reason I threw the Stusson engineering out there, we used even more. And in 2018, when I was still at Stusson engineering, our cover is 29,000. Because we did about 14,000 copies a month. We do in the neighborhood of 3,000 a month. All the works thereabouts. And there's also, I don't want to get into copiers too much.
It's important to discuss because like that's the rhetoric that you hear out there is like, you believe it, they're spending $5,000 on a copier, I can get one for $500 at Walmart.
And it says printer, and I think printer does sometimes sound like printer.
Well, this is network with a finisher, auto stapling, there are prints for planning commission packets, sometimes 300 pages in a pop, you know, it's
Industrial use, yeah.
It's industrial use and it's very common for any business. That's even, I used to own Stusson engineering for those who don't know that. So when I say I bought a copier for 29,000, I did buy a copier.
Do you still have?
All right, page 115. We need a golf cart, question mark. And yes, the general fund is budgeted for the purchase of a golf cart or a Polaris vehicle to ease the burden of setups and takedowns by staff for city events. Experienced that often events take multiple trips. We're using our cars, needing to go back and forth between storage and event sites to set things up. This is time consuming and inefficient. So this is being budgeted out of the general fund because multiple departments would be able to utilize the vehicle.
And although we had initially listed a golf cart, I anticipated actually it'd be a little more robust Polaris Ranger. And most likely bought from Polaris Sports locally. And so that you understand that has a dump bed. We do a lot of maintenance and the focus has been on the Main Street program and building. And so when you recognize that staff has been using their own vehicles, even on the ice skating rink or the event, or if we have someone with ADA that we've got to transport, or if police or fire needs to get someone out, you know, the reality is, you know, we just don't have anything. The closest thing that we have is a ATV, which is just that. I mean, is it 4-wheel?
It is.
Yeah, 4-wheel ATV. So
is it gonna be street legal then?
in North Bend downtown, it will be, yeah. There's. I'm not taking it out of the city limits, I'm not taking it out of the downtown corridor, but it's exactly, but it's no different than, you know, us driving our front end loader, you know, around downtown.
Alright,
Yeah, so it's going to be a, farm vehicle.
there you go. Alright, thank you.
Good idea.
Right, what is the status of PERS?
Well, I love them.
So the notes to the city of North Bend's financial statements for the year ended June 30th, 2023 provide detailed information about the city's participation in the Oregon Public Employers Retirement System. As of June 30th, 2023, the city's proportional share of the plan's net pension liability was $6,306,382. And the city has made all of the statutorily required contributions in fiscal year 23. And in fact, when you look at that disclosure, I think it goes back to 2014. The city's made the statutorily required contributions to PERS every single year. So we're not behind or deficient on.
I noticed that there
Making
was no
payments.
contribution in 2025.
It is included in the retirement line item. That's where those contributions go to. So it's not specifically called out to like a PERS line, but it's called retirement.
All right.
So. And the other, it's not PERS, but it's kind of significant because we see some increases, and we're seeing more increases to it. But there's kind of a legacy, benefit plan that the city has, and actually has, still, maybe 20 or so retirees and in it that we're still paying on. And so every year we get an estimate from our actuaries that, says, here's how much you need to contribute. And, I think, this last winter, we had someone who had reached retirement age and has started retirement on it. So it comes up from time to time, not often, but this year's I think the budget in here for those contributions is the city's having to come up with about $120,000 as a contribution to that legacy plan as well.
Eventually that'll.
It'll eventually go away. Yes.
There's only one way that occurs,
Yeah. That's what I got.
Eventually, yes.
And PERS changed, didn't it, from
Oh, yeah.
the mandated 8% or something, and now it's something different.
Tier 1.
Tier 1, tier 2, and now,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
changed.
yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
what happened.
Yeah.
But the legacy he's talking about is even predates PERS.
Great Western Life. Yes.
We had to look that one up, didn't we?
We did, yeah. It's, we get questions about it. I mean, I've even been in contact with the attorney who helped set it up, just so I had someone if I needed to go back and, talk about that plan, because you get calls from people who are going to retire. There's a process and people you have to contact it between the actuaries, I guess the custodial people that actually issue the payments, and then the plan itself. So it comes up, and not often, but it does. Okay, what is 16,500 for credit card processing fees, and can we change that? So the city is charged by Open Edge, which is one of our credit card processors. We're actually charged by all of them, but this particular line item is for Open Edge, based on a fee agreement, an amount each month that is dependent on the amounts and types of transactions. So when you look at the agreement, it lists out the different cards that are used and the different levels of transactions, and so we get a charge on that each month. Most of these types of plans do have an option where you can elect to push that charge to the card user. We don't do that with this particular one. We are absorbing that cost of those transactions. We could certainly change to do that. I put in a call today to find out specifically, because it really didn't call out very clearly in our agreement with them where we would elect to do that, or if that was even an option with this particular provider. And when I got through to customer service, it was one of those, every other word I could hear, and I couldn't really hear anything. So I have to try again.
Some other language right here.
Well, it was English. Yeah. But it was a bad phone call or connection. Yeah.
So it's just like off of our credit card systems too, like at the pool and other places we do stuff.
So that the pool, it uses a different system, and it has fees associated with it. And then Stephanie also has a different system. And we kind of keep them separate because it keeps activities separate too, and card activity. Library is different.
Would the fee limitation measure prevent us from actually changing this?
I don't know the answer to that question.
I have a legal opinion on what it says, which is we're not allowed to charge any new fees. So we can, if you want rent the credit card, rents are okay. But, there's some definition on what, we can do. And so we can't create a fee and charge it back without voter approval. So we could go to the voters and say, I know you've been paying all this inconvenience. Would you like to create a fee that we can charge you for your convenience? And it would cost us whatever the cost of the ballot initiative to figure that out.
I wonder as we move more and more in a society to electronic payment, so like, or if you, now even at the grocery store, if I have Apple Pay on my phone, you can go up and it just clicks. I wonder, is there a fee?
Fees, yes.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
fees on that,
Oh, yeah.
that are to the store, not passed to the consumer.
And so what you're seeing now, there's actually, if you follow some of the credit card industry news, almost everyone is starting to push back now. So like when you go down and you see the gas prices, those are cash prices. If you look at it real close, you know, and most folks don't. And so now a lot of them are open too. But if you go into a restaurant now, they'll automatically put a fee on there for a convenience fee. And so a lot of them are starting to, everyone's pushing back because it's fees. At the national level, there is movement going through Congress, and it's being fought hard by all of these, everyone that goes and gets their points, you know, those vanity credit cards and stuff, trying to tax and or eliminate all of that as well. And so it's a huge issue, but the difference is if we got into the cash handling business of all of this, what's the true trade-off of handling cash and handling that much? All it would take is, you know, a day's take or robbery or something like that. And then we actually then have to have staff going back and forth every single day on bank transactions. So again, what is the actual cost of doing business? I always tell folks, you know, same thing when we're going out for procurement. How much work is it going to take to get 3 quotes on something? And so let's follow, you know, what the state procurement is on that. So, but Jeff's going to look at it, and we're always interested. I know that most recently, I think Stephanie's behind me, there was a huge discussion among all the Main Street programs on cost, trying to figure out like, and like, there's not a lot of cost savings out there. In fact, at one point, we even looked at Costco, you know, trying to figure out like who's there's a cost attached to transfer everything. And so when I pay my taxes on my other properties out of state, I pay a convenience fee, you know, to pay the taxes versus writing a check. And I could send them a check, don't get me wrong, but if the check gets lost, I have late fees. If someone takes the check and takes my routing number, all that, you know, so, you know. But yes, I have out-of-state properties.
Madam Mayor, one of the other costs with, and we do have an increase of credit card transactions is it's labor intensive for our staff to go in and then reconcile like what the daily sales are with the processing, because oftentimes what you see is it takes several days for different credit card companies to settle that amount. So you kind of have this amount in limbo before you actually get it and it's transferred. And so there's a lot of reconciling that has to happen on a daily basis. And so it's adds some staff time as well to be able to do that.
Are you seeing that this company Open Edge does some software management for you besides just the fees, or?
No, just on any of the software platforms, whether it's Open Edge, Stripe, Square, their platforms are different. And I think the most complicated thing is you'll see a charge on one day, but then you won't see that money for maybe 5 to 6 days actually hit your bank account because of the settlement between the different credit card companies, the way it takes, or the way it works. So
I'm not really worried about 16.5 on a $49-50 million budget.
That was gonna be my comment.
So at the end, then I know what my actual cost is if I was in the cash business.
Yeah.
And it would far exceed 16,500. So
can you speak about when the pool levy runs out and how that will impact the budget? Yeah, so when the pools, we expect the pool's revenues to exceed its expenses in fiscal year 24 by $100,000. The pool's primary revenue source is the pool special levy. Without the pool special levy, expenses would exceed revenues in fiscal year 2024 by $300,000, resulting in the need for the city of North Bend to absorb that loss somehow. A similar or different revenue source will be necessary once the pool levy expires, and I believe that's coming up within probably the next couple of years.
They just started spending the money this last year, didn't they?
It's a 5-year levy and it started when it was open, right? So.
I think we're in the third year.
We're in year 3 of elections.
Okay.
Yes, and so we have to, so we'll be ahead of the revenue because we held until we actually opened with
Right.
operations.
Right.
So,
We're in year 3, so the collections on the levy will end in 2 more fiscal years.
yes.
Okay. So we need a plan. Not tonight.
On page 40 of the budget, under transient lodging tax, there is a reference to blank million in transit lodging tax revenue was included. Is this referencing the 320,000 on page 76? So there is a missing portion of the narrative to complete on page 40, describing the transient lodging taxes. Yes, the transient lodging taxes that are described on page 40 are the 320,000 taxes presented on page 76. So we, in the revenue section of the budget, we added or tried to add descriptions of the various types of revenue that the city receives. So this just, it was explaining the transient lodging tax.
So you left that blank for office.
There's a number I need to fill in there
Oh,
that
okay.
I haven't yet.
Okay.
So, yeah. In the fiscal year 25 employee wage schedule on page 109, you stated many of the employees are at the top of the pay scale. Are they at the top of this schedule, or will there be a revised schedule? So when I made that comment last night about employees being at the top of the wage scales, if they're not at the top of the wage scale, it's on page 109. That is the proposed one in the budget. Where I was referring to is if you were to go back to last year's budget, to the fiscal year 24 budget, and looked at those wage scales, that's where many of our employees are currently topped out. So what this scale would do is it would move those existing employees who are at the top of the scale perhaps back. So they're not at step 7, they might be at step 3 or 4. And then what that would do is leave room for advancement in future years. And then those scales then are what are adjusted for cost of living adjustments in each budget cycle. When we looked at this, I think it's important to note that no employee would move backwards. I want to say that you hear if I'm at step 7, I'm going to step 3, no one's going to lose out on wages or money. So it was very deliberately that no one would take a step back. The minimum that someone would get would be basically if we were to stay on the old schedules and go up just a 3.2% COLA, like that would be kind of the floor. And what we did is we looked at that and compared it to like the new steps, and we found the next step up closest to that. That's where we budgeted them for. So no one was moving back. It was an attempt to move everyone up, but also give people the opportunity to advance in their careers. With many employees at the top of their pay scale, are there a lot approaching retirement, or do you anticipate many staying and moving up on the pay scale? And I said it's difficult to project retirements, and I can say that we generally do not include those when we do our payroll projections. So when I plug in information in the software, I'm not taking into account retirements. We anticipate that employees will progress within the steps. And so we do make that assumption. So if someone is currently at a step 2 this year, when I go to my budget software, I'm going to say, okay, that employee is likely going to be at a step 3. And so for estimating purposes, I'll move them up that one. And we do that across the board unless they're topped out and there's really no place to go. But that is one of the assumptions that we make when we do the payroll projection, is to say that someone's going to be at their next step. And we do that across all of the either bargaining unit or non-represented employees. We're making that assumption. And it's a good question because it's a very key assumption that goes into that projection.
So when you say topped out, that's just the top, that doesn't include the COLA.
No,
correct? So
no,
they're
it's
gonna
just
get a cost of living,
correct.
even if they're at the top of their pay scale.
Yeah, so if the pay scales generally run from, let's say, step 1 to step 7, if someone's at step 7 in fiscal year 24, they got a COLA. If they're still there's nowhere for them to go. If we were to just say, roll it forward another year, they're still going to be at step 7. It's just that step 7 is going to have a cost of living adjustment applied to it. So you're going to get a little bump for that.
So I guess one other quick question is, does each step have equal pay increases? Or I know that in the union side of things, they have longevity. But do you see where I'm going? Does it have, is it 3% or is it?
Yeah, so generally, I think a
5%?
good rule of thumb is what I see is generally in that 2 to 3% increase between steps is what you see
Okay,
most frequently. When you have 7 steps, they're pretty incremental the way they go up. They're not like the non-representative scales. Well, all the scales are just base wages. So when you talk about longevity or you talk about in a CBA contract, like educational incentives, those are all on top of the wage scale. So the wage scale is base wage.
When was the last time you adjusted the scale? Do we know the last time you adjusted the scale?
David, when they actually tweaked, if we go to like
I was told that Jan Hillis was here as city administrator, and so
it's been a while.
that's,
Yeah.
Okay,
That was a million years ago.
okay, good to know.
and we have turnover. So, people come in, they start at lower steps and progress, and
Right.
it does happen. But we also do have a lot of employees who stay at the city a long time and are stepped out and don't have anywhere to go other, steps to progress. And
How
so,
did you get from the old scales to this scale?
yeah, good question. So I took the scale that was in last year's budget. So that was the old scales that was in here. Yeah, and then I compared that against, I took the comp study for non-represented that was done by Portland State University for the non-represented employees last fiscal year. So I took that and I took those positions and I created scales based on that specific study. I then applied last year's COLA to those amounts, and then this year's COLA to those amounts. And then I compared that back to our increases that we had in our current scales. And so if we were already going to be higher in ours, I kept those, and we had a few of those. And then if adjusting all of those scales on that based on last year's study, that's how we arrived at the new scales.
Yeah, well, because it hasn't happened in a long time, right? Yeah.
And I would say it's been, if you look at, it was in 2023 that we had the study done. It's likely using 2022 rates. I would certainly recommend doing a study come next calendar year and have that redone and really check and see where we're at with all of our positions. I would highly recommend that before making any other changes. Okay. And that concludes our questions.
I was like, well, I gotta know what you can.
So,
Any additional questions?
addition. So I think the next item on our agenda, if there are no more questions, would be for some committee deliberation, and then do we have a form for them?
I don't have a clean copy.
You don't have a clean copy, so I guess the formal action that's needed by this body would be to approve or not approve the proposed budget. What approving it does is just moving it to the next step. which would mean we have an approved budget that would be then ready to go before city council, who could also make adjustments or take action. If there's adjustments to this proposed budget that you feel are in order, we can also take those recommendations, incorporate them in, and still approve with those changes. So I think those are some of the deliberations that this body is charged with.
And
You know,
then,
Jeff, I do have a question, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The handout that you provided didn't have page numbers, but there's the infamous chart where you've got general fund resources. Or I'm sorry, general fund expenditures going up a little bit,
That's
but resources are going down very quickly between that.
Yeah, good question. Yes,
So
yes.
actually, I asked that question.
You did, and I don't know why. I know I answered it.
There you go. No.
Yes. So let me, I don't know what happened to my slides, because I know I touched on this one in my prep. So I think your question was
Nope, that's it. Right there.
this slide right here. So I think the question was along the lines of, why is revenue going down when I'm paying more and more in property taxes? And the answer is, this is really a graph that has projected resources on it, not just yearly revenues. So when I say resources, that's each year's revenues plus each year's working capital or estimate of cash. So it's like the total resources each year that the general fund has available. Now let's go back to the revenue slide. This is the general fund's revenue. It has an estimate in it of those increasing just slightly every single year. Now, remember, early on in our discussion, we looked at general fund revenues, and you can see they are increasing just a little bit, but pretty stable. That's what this same projection shows, is they go up a little bit each year. But the reason these are going down is because this includes those projected revenues, and it includes an estimate of the general fund's cash or working capital.
so this is also a projection, so that's why it says projected. And so this also basically says that almost everything stays status quo, with expectations that certain costs are always going to go up. Personnel costs are always going to go up. Benefits are going to go up. The cost of materials and services, electricity is astronomically going up. They'll be raising, water rates, things like that. Natural gas. So, what is not in this is always the will of the governing body, what it prioritizes on what it wants to do, what services it wants to provide, whether or not the city grows. And so internally, that's a lot of the discussion that we have with the Urban Renewal Agency, and why we've invested in training with the governing body and the Urban Renewal Agency is the URA is designed to implement projects that help with economic development and growth and development. And so I bring my 16 plus years of government experience, and one of the first things that I ever learned in my first finance course was that if you do not grow, you will die on the vine. And so we are looking to grow. And so as we work, Coos Bay is doing the same thing. When we're all at the state, it's almost like a small little circle up there that we're talking about how you grow. And so we're trying to grow our tax base through tax increment financing. And so that's why there's a lot of aha moments when you set through the URA training of, oh, this is actually how all this is supposed to work and does work. And so that is a very integral part, but you cannot do this in a silo. So that's why we work strategically with the partners. One of the things that the council did on Monday, and the letter went out today, was one of our strategic partners is the port and trying to evolve high-paying jobs, growth development. It's why we continue to have all of the high-level discussions with the Coast Guard and their investments and how they're evolving and changing. It's how we strategically work with certain developers, certain investors. It's not just a Coos Bay, North Bend, Coos County issue. It's strategic partners. And so when folks run for public office, it's why we get together and sort of have that, meetings of the minds that what you all do affects us and vice versa. And so you have to be at the table to have those conversations and have those discussions, because every government, and the data is there, is affected by stress. And I know that Councilwoman Jones and Councilwoman Nordoff and the mayor, we were all at Klamath Falls when you saw a city manager, from Grants Pass, holding a bag, running around the room and saying that's what it's like trying to balance the budget, in a relay race. Okay. But he spelled out exactly the taxation issue in this. Nobody wants to pay more taxes, but they kind of like driving on the streets. They like the fact that, there's street lights there. And when they got an emergency, they're getting to the hospital that is a quasi-government entity. Those are all government services that someone has to pay for. And unfortunately, the cost is going up. And so this budget and what we're accomplishing over this trajectory. 18 months ago, I started signaling to the council, and we actually had run models that showed that potentially we expected that precipice crossover to be at the start of this budget. Okay. Look then at the grants as to how we were able to peel off all of that from the general fund, and then all of the other concerted efforts, Haley over there, the library director, when you look at what they sent out about how much money they're bringing to the table, they weren't required to bring all that money to the table to help renovate that building. But it's the team effort through all of the library efforts. And that is what's occurring that allowed us now. So we have this trajectory 5 years out, and we'll continually have to work through that out. And so, for instance, I know this may be unique and odd, but I know in the public works budget, I'm assuming it's still in there. But I asked them to take a hard look at an autonomous lawnmower, as opposed to hiring staff to go out and mow all of the grass. And then if we have an autonomous, we can then have an intergovernmental agreement potentially with the airport, which could then, utilize. And so we are talking to our sister governments. They're looking at, getting a high-rise lift to change lights. And so they asked, well, if North Bend can use that, can they use this piece of equipment? And that's how we work together as sister governments. And that's the part that is important on the coast when, as I said, when things hit the fan, we have to pull on our own bootstraps here, because the state and the federal government's not going to be here for weeks to come. All right. And so that's, when someone says, someone asked Jeff, what keeps them up at night? What keeps me up at night is to make sure that we can continue to sustain the government. And so in every budget meeting that's occurring, the airport has theirs tonight. The airport will tell you they have an entire, pad out there that they got to figure out how they're going to come up with the money to redo it, because it's old. Okay. And it's not a cheap concrete pad. You listen to Coos Bay, who's running, like I said, I think there's just about 2.3 million deficit just on their public safety. We're all in this together, but we're working collaboratively together. And that's where some of these intergovernmental agreements have helped us transferring dispatch And I believe that the county needs to get in a centralized dispatch too. But they're making money at dispatch, whether or not they want to admit it or not. They're charging their other partners an excise fee instead of doing what's right for the whole county, which is a centralized dispatch to serve everybody. Well, we have saved our tax dollars and taxpayers significant funds instead of having dedicated services here. And we actually increased services too. And that's what we've been able to accomplish collectively. And so I say thank you for sticking with us and continuing the vision. And in January, after the election, we'll have a new strategic goal setting plan and a new strategic plan and look at the next 2 years. But collectively here, the staff is looking out, and we look out in 5-year tranches. And so if you were to ask every department head, they know succession planning and 5-year tranches of looking out into the future for that reason. So we have to continue to bring in additional revenues, find more efficient, effective ways to manage, find additional sources of revenue that's not all taxpayer based, because everyone's feeling it.
Well, they're locked in at 3%.
No, that don't do the math anymore.
Yeah, measure 5 and 50, plus the voter approved. And so we're going to go to the voters in December, most likely. That seems to be what the council's headed for on our wastewater. If the public says no, the reality is this is a government that will get fined if we do not maintain our sanitary sewer system, because it is a regulated utility. And so pay now, pay later, that's your choice. Coos Bay got into that situation. I wasn't here, but you hear from folks like, Councilwoman Stephanie Kilmer is like, that was the purpose for me to run for public office. And so I read about some of the history, and then working with then city manager, Roger Craddock as he was transitioning. So we're all about good ideas, and we're all open to new ideas. If there are more effective ways to manage the government, by all means, we want to hear them. And so that's why collectively we try to do what we're doing. So thank you. By the way, you can't have another meeting tomorrow if you so choose. So this is your opportunity to deliberate and decide what the committee wants to do, whether or not wants to make changes to the budget or recommend to move it forward. And as Jeff said, the council still has the option then to make additional changes before they actually do the adopt. But this governing body has to either recommend as is, recommend with changes, or you can come back tomorrow and deliberate. But I won't have dinner for you tomorrow.
I think we can pull it off.
Oh, and one other item too, the chamber here is reserved for the school district tomorrow. So if we do have to have a meeting tomorrow, we'll be in the
smaller room.
Yeah.
Let's pull this off.
Okay.
But we can do that.
Do I need to close the meeting before deliberations?
This is your time to deliberate now. So staff is done. We're here for any questions, but now this is your opportunity to deliberate on any recommendations that you have for the budget.
Okay. So there are a couple options that we can do. We can have a motion to accept or not the budget, or we can have a motion to extend this until tomorrow. So I don't really motion on one of those.
I'll make a motion, we approve the budget as presented to us for presentation to the council. Second.
Okay, we have a first by Larry Garbode, second by Pat. Do we have any discussion?
I initially looked at this and said, no, I'm not gonna vote for it. And then I realized that it is not the purpose of the budget to create solutions. So it is up to these guys to figure out how in 2029 we're not gonna fall off the table.
That is true.
So I changed my mind.
I just want to add that I appreciate the structure of the meeting and for us to kind of take tonight to dig into some of the weeds and answer boring questions about credit card fees, but I want to have more knowledge about that sort of thing. So I appreciate that model and I feel satisfied that all my questions were answered. I also know that you have an open door policy. So if something comes up down the road and any one of us want to email you or ask you further questions or clarifications to you or the city administrator, that we still have that option. That doesn't mean closed book. I can't have a further explanation at the point.
Absolutely.
We have some blank space between that, before the word million, are we gonna have, you're gonna put a number in before we have to finally approve it?
Yeah, so when you, this is almost like, this is a draft,
Yeah.
the proposed
Okay.
numbers are the,
Just making
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
That's-
So- Yeah.
I would love that.
I really appreciate the order. I felt like it really highlighted sort of the now and the immediate future really well. And then each step into more detail was super helpful. And I also really appreciate that it just seems like most of our questions, it was like, and here's the chart, and here's the chart, so it just really, it was fantastic.
We'll add the one though with the unit salary information, sure, like that's a good
I
one.
appreciate the
I
detail.
think this last slide too is a projection. And you have 5 years to find a way to, whether it's through grants or, whatever, to get the revenue that you're looking for.
Economic development.
Yeah, and that's true. And then like I said, and putting these buildings back on the tax roll. I mean, I think that's critical to this. To the infrastructure in North Bend. I mean, that's all there is to it. I mean, this annex building hasn't had taxes paid on it since 1929. I mean, and it's gonna have taxes paid on it. I mean, and it's gonna be a lot. And that's one of the reasons that the council decided that was a good move. And I still believe it's a good move. And it takes time, but it'll get there. And again, once that happens, this line's gonna change. I mean, you have to look at it that way too. It's gonna change considerably. So anyway, yeah, I think it's a great job.
Thank
Good
you.
job on everything.
That was one of the main things I really wanted to add in this budget was that forecast, because I think it's something we can update and look at. Because I think it is useful for, making decisions and seeing what's changed.
Mhm.
Yep.
The
And it's-
projections are based on trends.
Exactly. And I mean, that's been part of our transparency of coming to the council and we started 18 months ago. And so different departments, we started the Talk of the Towns. Jeff had the largest turnout of staff members at his. Of staff members. Yeah. That's a correct statement.
Will you be giving it up soon?
He
Know
just
when the
did.
next one is.
But,
But listen to that on the YouTube.
Great
I listened
catering.
to it.
Okay, folks, if we could get back to our
Slides.
deliveries.
Yes, slides.
This is a time for deliberation amongst the budget committee. So do we have any other comments at this time?
It's really good explanations throughout of the different parts of the budget, which are really, I think they're really, it's very well put together.
Great,
Very
thank you.
helpful.
So myself, looking at the chart that you see before you and Cliff. When I went home last night, I was not very excited about that. Listening to the questions and answers that we have talked about tonight, realizing that that is a projection. And then there's this other bar chart here. If you all looked at that, it has our expenses going down a little bit this year from last year.
A little bit.
Went up a chunk from 23 to 24, went up quite a bit. but that was behind us, so it goes down a little bit. We discussed, we're not gonna be spending an extra $500,000 in wages, we're actually gonna be spending less in wages. Thank you, Jeff. So with that, I am feeling much better about this, so. No other questions? We have a motion to approve the budget as presented. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Resolution passes.
Okay.
Thank you.
You are.
Do we need one? Yes.
So now we're gonna close this meeting. And now I don't know what to do.
Well, we'll open the URA meeting.
Okay, now I will.
No, it was good, yeah.
Before I do that, does anyone need to run out for just a couple minutes, or are we all okay? 2 minutes, okay.
Maybe.
8:02. Right, okay, 8:02.
No,
Wait, we're taking 2 minutes?
no.
No,
You're
we're
not
not taking 2 minutes.
Oh, this is gonna take 2 minutes. Oh. Larry's jumping up and down. All right, so I'll now open the meeting for the North Bend Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee. This is Wednesday, May 15th, 2024. It is 8:00 p.m. First thing to do is have our elections for presiding officer and secretary. Do I have
We
any?
did that.
We're doing that, yes.
So that, yes, is it the same
Different.
person for each, or does it have to do it for each one?
It's a different, so you
It's
can
a-
do it.
I think we have to redo that, because it's a different entity.
I'll make a motion to have the same officers as you do for the budget.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, same officers. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Okay, so now we have the approval of the URA Budget Committee minutes from May 17th, 2023. We were provided with a draft of those minutes.
I move that we accept the URA and budget committee meeting minutes from May 17th, 2023.
I second.
Okay. Motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution passes. This is the time for public comments. Do we have any public comments, Derek?
We don't have anyone that I'm aware of signed up for this one.
Not for this meeting, now.
Okay, all right. Moving on to committee deliberation. I'm not sure what we're supposed to deliberate, so. if you guys-
Right, so the URA budget is, yes, on 121, it's got your expenditures of just over 300, well, 378,000. Most of the fund balance is unappropriated, and remember, this is the one that once we move forward with the annex in earnest and have the funds, we will most definitely be coming back to you to have a supplemental budget and appropriate those funds. Yes. Yes.
Is that licorice you've been?
Huh?
Is that licorice?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was like, it looked like really weird smoked meat, but okay. Well, you didn't want to eat our brisket, so
Okay.
probably did.
So we're saving the money for the building, basically, is what's happening.
Yes, there's very limited spending. I believe it has spending in it for Bay Area cleaners and a little bit for Salon Bella. Until we have the,
For the end.
I move to
for
accept
the
the
annex,
original
yes.
budget as presented.
Second.
Okay.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Good job.
Okay, I would ask that all in favor of adopting the budget as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion passes.
Robert, ready?
With that, I'll close the meeting at 8:03. Remember, it was 3 minutes.